Welcome to Femme and Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Rose Portela, and today we are taking down John Tucker. But before we dive into today's episode, let me tell you how you can support the podcast. You can follow anywhere you get your podcast. Watch full video breakdowns on YouTube. Go get your cultural analysis over on Substack. Get your community and the group chat vibes over on Patreon, and of course, you can always follow on Instagram and TikTok at Femme and Furious Pod. All right, we are talking about John Tucker Must Die. This is a Femme and Now episode, which I've done a few of these already this year, where we look at movies that are turning 20 years old and we dissect them based on their cultural impact, their gender themes, all that fun stuff. And we see how they've held up over the past 20 years. So let's dive into the plot for John Tucker Must Die. What happens when all of the women you've hit it and quit it with decide to unionize? The death of John Tucker, of course, because hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. John Tucker, a high school himbo with the emotional depth of a teaspoon, is simultaneously dating three girls who each embody a different early 2000s stereotype. When they discover his little rotational dating schedule, they are convinced by the new girl to collaborate and bring him down. The movie proceeds to spend an hour and a half having the girls attempt to seduce and humble a mediocre man. Okay, let's take a little hot girl historical walk into the past and examine the cultural context of John Tucker Must Die and how it left its mark on the cultural zeitgeist. At the box office, John Tucker Must Die didn't exactly burn the patriarchy to the ground, but it did hold its own. It opened at number 3 and pulled in a respectable global total, thriving less as a critical darling and more as a sleepover staple, which is how I was first introduced to this movie. Critics were lukewarm, but audiences, they understood the assignment. This movie was not designed to be prestige cinema. It was designed to be revenge porn as a communal feminist experience. You didn't watch it for nuance. You watched it to have some quotable content for your away message. The target audience is very clearly supposed to be teenage girls, packed in a hyper-specific mid-2000s aesthetic. It's very glossy. There's a lot of purple, neon green that is happening in this movie, which to me is like the early aughts aesthetic palette. You've got sort of a mean girl vibe happening, and then you have a very boy-centered story. The actual impact is a little bit subversive because instead of pitting girls against each other for the duration of the movie, which is like the genre's favorite sport, it lets these girls team up and overcome the idea of social cattiness that riddled these types of movies in the early aughts. Genre-wise, it sits in that golden age of like teenage comedies that were just starting to really evolve and come out into the pop cultural landscape. You've got Mean Girls that happened a little bit earlier, that is like sharpening its claws with social satire. You have She's the Man, which also comes out in 2006, which don't worry, I will be doing a Femme and Now on She's the Man a little bit later this year. And of course, She's the Man is playing with gender performance, which had a really deep impact, I think, for the time. And then you have John Tucker Must Die, which sits somewhere in the middle of these things, asking the question, what if the villain is just a guy who texts you up to multiple women? It is less intellectually biting than Mean Girls or even She's the Man, but spiritually aligned with the era's slow pivot towards emphasizing women's empowerment. As for the cast, this movie is basically a time capsule of shit, I know them. I was actually floored. I genuinely forgot every single person who was in this movie. Like, I think when you think about John Tucker Must Die, the plot sits in my mind of like, this is what happens in that movie. But I could not have named a single person that was in this movie before rewatching it. And this was one of the most delightful surprises. You have Jesse Metcalfe, who was writing, his Desperate Housewives heartthrob energy. I never watched Desperate Housewives, so he wasn't on my radar, but I know that that was like his breakout role. You have Sophia Bush, who was deep in her One Tree Hill era at this point. Again, I was late to the One Tree Hill party, so I wouldn't have known who Sophia Bush was when I first watched this movie. But looking back, I was like, oh man, this is a star studded cast. You have Ashanti, who is in there. And then you have Brittany Snow, who really, I think at this point was just having a moment in soap operas. And of course, you have Penn Badgley. Culturally, the film is swimming in the same waters as the rise of reality TV. It's got this tabloid essence, a girl on girl drama, unfolding in a time period where the media machine loved to tear women apart for sport. So when John Tucker Must Die lets its female characters redirect that chaos towards a man who actually deserves it, it feels almost radical, or at least it did at the time. Not because it was perfect, but because it was daring to ask a question which we would not hesitate to talk about now or ask now, which is like, what if the problem isn't other women? Like, what if it's men? This movie would shake hands with the male loneliness epidemic. So let's talk about a first watch versus a rewatch, okay? I first watched this movie a few years after it came out, maybe a year and a half after it had come out. I watched it at a sleepover. I was in 8th grade and a friend of mine was going through a breakup. So we were having a girls' night with a movie marathon, and this was one of the movies that was on the docket. I don't think I ever watched this movie again after. It was like a one and done. It was a one hit wonder. And I'm wondering if that's why it didn't have the same cultural anchorage as like some of the other movies that had similar themes or ideas in the same period of time. That's not to say that it had no pop cultural clout, because I can distinctly remember people talking about this movie throughout my high school career. So it wasn't like it didn't impact, because people did talk about it. It was just that like it wasn't to the same caliber as like a Mean Girls or even a She's the Man, something that would get put on at every sleepover versus just the one time. What surprised me on a rewatch was literally just how much star power there was. The cast alone had the potential to make this movie a cult classic, and yet it didn't. And that I thought was really interesting. This was, like I said, way before I ever watched One Tree Hill, but One Tree Hill was already out in the universe at this point. So you have Sophia Bush, you have Jesse Metcalfe. This is also a few years before Gossip Girl, but not so far away from Gossip Girl that by the time you have Penn Badgley in this role of Dan in Gossip Girl, that people wouldn't turn around and be looking at his work and rewatching this movie because he's in it. Especially because even in season 1 of Gossip Girl, Dan takes a romantic lead. So I could see young girls like in this Tumblr era of, the internet, going back and watching John Tucker just to have like another bite or dose of Penn Badgley, especially when Gossip Girl would be on break or something like that. And of course, in the early aughts, we had Ashanti as like this music icon, still is, but like really in those early 2000s, really bringing in a lot of cultural relevancy for the movie. And so I'm surprised on a rewatch that it didn't have more of a cult following than some of the other movies at its time. But all right, let's talk about the aging report card. As far as themes and messaging go, I'm giving it a B minus. At its core, this movie is juggling two main ideas. First, we have this very after school special thread of like honesty is the best policy. Kate's big moment at John's birthday party is essentially her saying like, this is the real me, take it or leave it, which feels very in alignment for this like prototype of 2000s authenticity arc, but weird in its placement in this movie, considering that there's nothing really to unveil for Kate's character other than the fact that she's been like fake dating John. So the real you is just single. Like, I don't understand really why it's deployed that way. would have done better if it followed the thread of her having this conversation with John and saying, I don't like who I am, or having a conversation with these girls and being like, I don't really like who I am. She tries and she kind of fails. Then she has this conversation with her mom, and then she goes to the birthday party and she's just like, to the entire school, like, this is me. This is who I am. And it's like, oh, somebody who fesses up to like doing something wrong. I don't know. It just, the plot falls a little flat there. Meanwhile, John's version of growth is like admitting that he's dating two girls at once, which is technically honest, I suppose. This idea of John being honest that he's dating two girls is walking so that situationships could run by the 2010s. His arc literally just feels like he got upgraded from a charismatic liar to a pig. Then there is a much more compelling message, which is women are stronger together. And fighting over a man is frankly, the film wants to champion solidarity, and in flashes, it really does do that. The girls teaming up is the emotional spine of the story, even if the movie keeps poking at the spine with little jabs of competition here and there. The theme still lands, but it just feels a little undercooked. If this were made today, the solidarity would come much faster and with much less side eye. We are currently living in a girls' girl era. And the through line of this era that we're in right now in 2026 does not have the patience for prolonged infighting over a man whose personality is just tall, buff, and dimpled. Like, this is somebody we would all swipe left on and then laugh about on the internet because we'll be like, what do you mean you don't know what your dating goals are? The feminist lens, I give it a C+. The movie is basically just cosplay of 2000s archetypes. Heather is the queen bee cheerleader. John is the varsity playboy. Kate is the invisible new girl. Beth is the over-sexualized hippie. Carrie is the academic overachiever. And Scott is the social outcast with a heart of gold. It is less about character development and much more of a personality Mad Libs. Real people in these scenarios would just respond differently. But somehow the 2000s does like a really good job of flattening people into very digestible archetypes, which was on brand for the era, but feels really dated upon a rewatch now that audiences crave a lot more texture, or at least because my frontal lobe is developed, I crave a lot more texture. Surprisingly, the girls in the movie have a lot of agency. They make choices. They are not going to be controlled by men so much as reacting to the men, or particularly to John Tucker. That said, their choices are still orbiting John like he is the sun, which limits how liberating this actually feels on a rewatch. A genuinely surprising moment, I will say, is the inclusion of two deaf characters. It is very brief, but noticeable, especially for a mid-2000s teen comedy that otherwise plays things very safe. It doesn't revolutionize representation by any stretch of the means, but it did make me laugh. Their joke was very funny to me, and it earned a raised eyebrow of approval on my part. Characters and relationships, B. Solid B. This is like solid B work. The unlikely friendship between the girls, that's the good stuff. That is the creme de la creme. Watching women with completely different social identities and social roles come together and find friendship is still a very satisfying and compelling arc to me. It taps into this universal fantasy of realizing that your frenemy was never really the problem to begin with, which I think has become a really compelling story nowadays. I love this type of story when two people that are pitted as frenemies actually find a path forward to a maybe unconventional friendship, but friendship nonetheless. There's something really powerful in that shift from rivalry to alliance, even if the movie takes its sweet time getting there. By the third act, when they were still making little jabs at each other over John Tucker, I was really finding it hard for my eyeballs not to roll to the back of my head. The constant low-level competition between the girls is like white noise throughout the entire movie. Even when they're working together, there is still tension, there's still jealousy, there's still a lot of comparison baked in. And today, that dynamic just feels fucking exhausting. Modern audiences are far more attuned to narratives that skip the catfight phase and go straight for, like, he's the problem, actually. On a progressive note, I will say that Lori, who is Kate's mom, sneaks in as one of the best characters of the movie. I don't know if I just resonate with adult characters more now that I am an adult. But when Kate confronts her mom about how her chaotic dating life is affecting her, Lori doesn't deflect or gaslight. She listens to Kate, she apologizes to her, and then she adjusts her behavior, which feels revelatory for like the millennial in me. So I really enjoyed that. I thought this was like really wonderful. I wish we got more time between Lori and Kate because I actually thought that there was a lot between their relationship that would be really interesting to explore and understand, especially today in a modern world. On a regressive note, John's like growth arc hanging on by a fucking thread. The bar for male redemption is so low, and watching this movie made me realize like how low it's been for so long. It's practically underground. His honesty at the end of the movie being framed as progress is giving like missing the fucking plot. All that to say is like John Tucker is not winning Feminist Ally of the Year. All right, let's dive into our superlatives. Most iconic scene, John Tucker in the red thong with everyone recording him on their digital cameras. It is so funny. It's funnier because John Tucker is like the best PR agent that John Tucker could have. This man could spin any situation to his freaking benefit, which is why even though this was embarrassing and shameful for him in the moment, like he doesn't let himself sit in bad feelings. He literally just spins something and makes it into something so cool. By the end of the movie, we have this like Regina George, cut, the nipples out of your shirt moment where all of the boys are wearing thongs, all of the men teachers are wearing thongs. John Tucker has a natural ability to put a really good spin on something, and I will give him credit for that. Most 2000s moment. All three girls on a little dinghy boat, and they get a no signal with their phones. Nothing, and I mean nothing captures the horror of the mid 2000s like a dead cell phone. Dead as in you could not get a bar, and having that moment of crisis. There's no backup. There's no find my friends. It's just vibes and poor decisions when we were living in that era. A close runner up in the tech category as well is like the video camera blackmail setup, grainy footage with questionable ethics is peak early aughts. Character who deserved better. Kate. Our invisible girl is doing all of the emotional labor, revenge plotting, identity crisis, and having to navigate a mom who's basically living in a deleted scene from Stacy's mom. Give this girl a break. Give her a normal Tuesday. Give her friends who don't recruit her into psychological warfare after she has not had friends over however long her life has been, because we don't know what year she is in her high school career. Feminist win, feminist facepalm. Win. The girls teaming up, full stop. In a genre that is obsessed with women tearing each other apart, this alliance is a small but mighty rebellion. Feminist facepalm. The whole estrogen plotline. Turning John into a chocolate-eating, body-insecure mess of a man as punishment is just, number one, not how hormones work, and also not what femininity is. Womanhood as humiliation is not the empowering take that this movie thinks that it is. Okay, aged like fine wine. This is be a girl's girl energy before it had a name. The idea that the problem is not other women, that it's the man who is playing all of you, is still So relevant and still needs to be screamed from the rooftops. Aged like gas station sushi. Being a vegan teen activist is usually code for easy. I beg your finest pardon. That line had me pausing my TV to be like, what the actual fuck? It expired on impact. Hot Shuffle. Just the Girl by The Click. Literally, when this song came on in the movie, it anchored me right into 2006. And last but not least, our Rest in Peace in 2006 award. In loving memory of the cinematic food fight from 1995 to 2006, pronounced dead upon impact with buttercream frosting. We gather here today to mourn the fallen soldier of teen cinema, the unnecessary, completely unhinged, and absolutely inevitable food fight scene. She lived loudly, died messily, and left behind a trail of mashed potatoes, emotional breakthroughs, and questionable hygiene practices. Her final, most operatic performance, John Tucker Must Die. It began as these things so often did, with humiliation. A drink launched with precision, baptizing Kate into the social battlefield, and then escalation. Because in the 2000s, no conflict could simply just end. No, it had to crescendo into culinary chaos. And that is where, in John Tucker Must Die, we introduce the stripper cake, which is really just a buttercream Trojan horse. Social hierarchy is dissolved in this trope under layers of icing. The food fight served a very specific cinematic and cultural purpose. It was the great equalizer. In a world obsessed with popularity, clicks, beauty, control, the food fight came in and said, well, what if everyone was just equally ridiculous? What if the cheerleader, the nerd, the villain, and the hero all ended up in cake? But alas, time marched on, audiences grew weary, health codes were checked, and perhaps most damning of all, we developed a collective awareness that wasting an entire cake for emotional catharsis might not be the move. She did not go quietly. She went out in a blaze of frosting-fueled glory, taking John Tucker's dignity down with her. And today we remember her not as she was, sticky and chaotic and narratively unnecessary, but as she made us feel in the moment, which was delighted, unhinged, and just a little bit power hungry. Rest in peace, Queen. You were never practical, but you were always committed to the bit. All right, final verdict. The legacy score. Cultural impact, 5 out of 10. A solid entry in like the teen revenge canon, but it's not groundbreaking and it's definitely not a deeper part of the conversation. Rewatchability, 7 out of 10. She's messy, she's fun, she knows exactly what she is, and it is a perfect background movie. Feminist resonance, 6 out of 10. Points for the Girl Alliance, deductions for everything else that was orbiting that. Nostalgia power, 5 out of 10. It's here for a good time, not a long time. Overall legacy score, 6 out of 10. It's a chaotic feminist light revenge fantasy that walked so that he's just a man, dump him, TikTok videos could run. All right. That is our episode for today. If you like this episode, please share it out with your friends. A little update on the podcast. I will be back on Tuesday. We are covering season 3, episode 1 of Euphoria. So we'll be covering Euphoria through its 3rd season. And then I will be back next Friday with chapters 1 through 10 of The Deal. Now, The Deal is the first book in the Off-Campus series that is written by Elle Kennedy. These books are hockey romances, but it's being adapted by Amazon, and that will come out on May 13th. It will be a binge drop, so it's 8 episodes, I believe. But this first season is diving into the first book in the series, which is The Deal. So we'll be covering The Deal from 10 chapters at a time, pretty much, from April 17th until May 8th. And then on May 15th, I will be doing an episode on the TV series. So if you've wanted to read The Deal, or you've wanted to get into Elle Kennedy books, or you want to watch the off-campus series, we're doing that together. On Tuesdays, we'll be covering Euphoria through June. So we have some time that we'll be with Euphoria until Tuesday. Go die, John Tucker.